Thank you so much, Professor Koripe, for the lovely introduction. And thank you, Professor Manori, for giving me this opportunity. I always look forward to give a talk to the servants of the Buddha. It's one of my favorite places. So let me get straight into the topic and speak about the Noble Silence. In order to make it complete, I thought of talking very briefly about some aspects of this of silence and noble silence. So the first thing I'd like to share is silence as a quality is something that the Buddha admired. And Buddha is known to be a person who encouraged silence. So there are two little stories, so to speak, that comes to my mind. So one is King Ajasatha, after the incident with his father and all the trauma that caused by it, when he was in a state of deep regret, and he was wondering what to do, and he tried many things to come out of the remorse and the regret he was feeling. The minister suggested to him, why don't you go and speak to the Buddha? And even went on to say that today he's there at the mango grove or wherever that was, at a park, with over 1,000 of his monks in attendance. And he receives people in the evening. So why don't you go and speak to him? So one day King Ajasatha actually thinks of taking on this, and he goes to see the Buddha. Now he goes looking for the Buddha in this Aranya, or the park, expecting the kind of surrounding you will get when over 1,000 people are gathered together. So he was probably expecting a marketplace kind of activity, engagement and activity. And as he was drawing near to the place where the Buddha was, he became very suspicious because the place was so silent. He in fact even thought that, could it be that the minister tricked me and could this be an ambush actually? Maybe there's nobody here. So to his utter surprise, the Buddha was sitting with over 1,000 monks, mostly arahats, and in silence. And there was one person asking a question and everybody else was silent. And then the Buddha responding. And this was a sight the king was really amazed to see. The story, when I read it somewhere, it made an impression in my mind, how silence is so associated with the Buddha. And I was thinking that when the leader displays certain characteristics and certain likings towards certain qualities, of course the followers also follow. Another little story I read somewhere was that how people associate silence with the quality of silence with the Buddha. So the Buddha was going to meet some ascetics in one of their gatherings. And when the ascetics could see the Buddha coming, they just naturally silenced. They just stopped talking out of respect. And where I read this, it said that as they know that the Shakyamuni was an admirer of the quality of silence, so they became still and silent in respect of the Shakyamuni as he advanced. So these two things I felt, because we are here 2,600 years later, the context might be different. We have no idea what these things are referring to, but I think it gives us an idea of the person that we love and adore and try to role model for those qualities. And I think this is one aspect that we probably haven't thought enough. silence as a tool is something we come across when we look at the Buddhist scriptures, where the Buddha did not answer certain philosophical questions. And the way I understood this back then was wherever there was a question that had the answer had no material impact, irrespective of what the answer is, those kind of things he didn't answer. Now, while these things sound theoretical for us, I think even in our own life, we come across situations like this where you actually wonder why engage in this conversation at all. Now, given that I am associated with teaching the Dhamma and meditation, once in a while, a friend or a relative will pop a question. So recently, a friend asked me, what happens after you die? And I asked the person, what makes you interested? Why are you asking this? And then the person said, that's because I have a debate with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law says that once you die, your rebirth is like a leech, like a kudala. You get attached to one place before you let go of this place. Whereas I hold a different opinion. I feel that your body kind of separates and your mind, or refer to some term, it's floating around until the right place is ready for you. So, and he was asking me, what do you think? What do you think is the right answer? I said, honestly, I don't know, because this is an area that I'm not interested in. And I said, suppose you do know the answer, what are you going to do with it? And how will it make any difference to your life right now? And then he was thinking and he was like, well, actually, it has no material impact. I said, exactly. Exactly. I said, why can I interest you in something more relevant? For example, I said, have you ever considered that you don't exist as a person? I said, that is something more important and relevant to think about, since you are born a Buddhist and since you very proudly wear the label of a Buddhist. I think it's important that you think about what the Buddha was talking about, what the Buddha was preaching, and that is the fact that you don't exist. And maybe that is something you should pay some attention to, because thinking about it will actually have some material impact for you. So, so these are the kind of things that help us to reflect on the conversations that we engage in. Are they useful or not? When it comes to noble silence, if I just tell you what it means, it's a silence becomes noble when it is an inner silence. Now, generally, we refer to silence as the absence of speech. But interestingly, if you think of communication, speech or the words we speak is only 7% of our communication. A good 65% is actually our body language, especially facial expressions. And another 38% is our tone of voice. So actually, when we communicate, speech itself is only, or rather the words itself is only 7%. Most of the story is non-verbal communication. So noble silence refers to a state where there is an inner state of silence. So the most frequently referred to place is in the jhanas, particularly the second jhana. And this is how it was mentioned. When the inner dialogue or the inner chatter goes silent during meditation, when the directed thought and evaluations become still, that state is referred to as a noble silence. For me, that sounds a bit theoretical. It's not something I have personally experienced, so I prefer to speak of things that I have experienced. And what I have experienced in noble silence is actually what you experience when you go for a meditation retreat. My first meditation retreat was something I participated when I was 24 years old. I had just graduated. And the following year, I was due to get married. And my father suggested he said, knowing how what happens after marriage, you get so busy. If you are ever interested in a retreat, this is the best time. And I took his word for it and went to Hindagala for Goenkaji's 10-day program. And there I was introduced to, for the first time in my life, this concept of noble silence. Now, given that I was a young girl, my mother accompanied me. So one instruction we were given is that the two of us will be separated and we'll be in two different places in the place. And we were specifically told about noble silence being not only that you are not supposed to talk, you do not communicate at all. So we were told not to look for each other. Don't communicate with your eyes, because you can ask with your eyes, how are you? And the other person can answer with the eyes, whether you are fine or not. So we were specifically told during the common meditation sessions not to look for each other. And even if you accidentally see the person, to look the other way, to try and really stay away from all forms of communication, which includes, of course, gesturing, signing, using other various nonverbal modes. Now, for me, there was something a little bit scary about this, because at that time, 24 years old, I was quite an extroverted person. I loved human interactions. I was what people call a chatterbox. I love talking. And when I was told that for the next 9.5 days, you don't talk, I couldn't fathom what it's going to be like and whether it's something I could do. And to my surprise, I really enjoyed it. I was really surprised that I enjoyed it. And it was a very unique experience to know that not talking is more enjoyable. It was quite profound, and I guess it was also useful for the people around me, because I guess after that I didn't talk as much. So what I'm trying to say is that this form of noble silence, and when I came back and eventually started work, and when I would talk about this, people would be surprised, because for many of us, life, how we live life is defined about how we talk and the conversations we make. Now, as I was interested in the path and kept learning and reading and studying about the path, something that I came across again and again and again was that our mind in its original form is pure, it's calm, and it's peaceful. And it already knows the state of nibbanic bliss. It's aware of it. So then what happens is sense impressions that come through our sense doors, where we have our likings and our dislikings, causing us to grasp and cling, where there is greed and aversion, all of it resulting in this delusion of me, myself, I, feeling and believing that I am seeing, I am hearing, I am tasting, I am smelling, and this is how I live. So we go with the flow. And what is required is, whenever those sense impressions are coming and hammering away at us, to pause and to observe. And while the noble silence that I heard and I experienced way ago, I mean, I'm over 50 now, so this is more than 25 years ago. While that was the noble silence that I understood back then, in the past few years, in trying to practice particularly what Venerable Ajahn Chah describes as do nothing and just observe. Now, this was very confusing when I first read about it. How do you do nothing and how do you just observe? And if we put some steps into this, that whole doing nothing and just observe, there's something very noble about it, and there's something very silent about it. And when I suggested to Professor Manori that let's talk about noble silence, I was actually coming from this place of the need to not react. So if you think of the Panchaskandha, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, if you think of those, how does this work? The more you start observing, the more you realize that we are actually a program that is running, and the program gets programmed each time we run it. So the more we run it, the more we program ourselves. So what does this mean? Now, when you say something, right? If you think of a visual object and your eye, just because there is a visual object in front of you and you have your eye, your healthy eye, it doesn't mean you're going to see, right? Your mind's attention has to connect the two. When your mind's attention connects to the two, then only you really see. And what you see, electromagnetic charges from your eye to your brain goes through the optical nerve. And your brain, being the supercomputer, starts to interpret what you are seeing. And you have your perceptions about it, whether you like it or whether you don't like it. Based on that, the feelings arise. So initially also feelings arise, but they are neutral because you haven't interpreted what you saw. And as you interpret, then feelings associated with your interpretation, if you like it, you get the sukha vedana. If you don't like it, you get the dukkha vedana. And based on that, you start to react. So this is a very automatic process. And this is something we are doing from the time we are born. And what makes a Buddha extraordinary is, because if you really think about it, a Buddha coming into being is a very rare occurrence. And therefore, what he understands has to be very rare as well, right? It cannot be something that any normal person could have understood. And when you think of the way the Dhamma is represented to us, at least when you look at it without the meditation, you look at it with the theory, and that is how you usually get it first as a child. You learn about it in school. And what we were told is, aging is suffering, is dissatisfying, sickness is dissatisfying, death is dissatisfying. When you lose somebody you love, it's not great. Having to stay with people you don't like, that's not great. When you really think about these things, there's nothing incredible about this, isn't it? Everyone else seems to get it also. So obviously, after 2,600 years, it's possible that with so many interpretations, the mainstream things got more attention than the core of what was the original thinking, the original teaching. And in order to find those original thinking, which is also available in the world, but it's not mainstream. So you have to be really interested. If you're interested, you'll find it. It will come to you. But for the majority, they are not interested. And therefore, it doesn't come. Or rather, even if it comes, they probably ignore. So what makes the Buddha incredible is because he saw that the way we live today, the way we identify ourselves, and the way we are interpreting everything is false. And he called it delusion. You are living in a delusion because you believe you exist. Whereas, and with that delusion, then comes the greed to continue that existence, and aversion whenever that existence is getting threatened. And so goes the cycle. And there are few people who follow what is instructed, and they realize, they understand what the delusion is. And then they see the reality. And then these people are called the awakened people. And in today's context, we call the first awakened person the Buddha, because that is something you have to figure out on your own. And then the other awakened people, we call them the Rahatan Mahansis. So this is the crux of it. It all starts with that delusion. And in order to overcome that delusion and see the reality, what is required is where this topic is coming from, that noble silence. Because the natural inclination for us is, when you see something, you start thinking about what you saw, and then you start speaking and behaving in the nature of the feelings that got evoked based on what you saw. When you hear something, the same thing happens. Based on what you heard, you start thinking, and based on the feelings that are getting evoked, you start behaving and speaking. So this happening, imagine happening over and over and over and over again. And at a point, if you can watch this happening in another person, you will see that we humans are like puppets. What is dictating how we respond? Something external to us. Everything external to us is finally dictating how we respond, based on how we have perceived them in the past. Now, these perceptions that we have in our supercomputer brain, if you really look at it, it's found that almost 70% of those perceptions were formed before the age of 15. So imagine now at the age of 50, 60, 70, we are responding, we are reacting to perceptions that we formed before the age of 15. And that is the trap. And you see this manifesting, you see people saying, that is my way. This is how I am. Where does that come from? It has come from these original, or rather the early experiences we had, which has formed a thought, a feeling, a liking, a disliking, a desire. And we are simply using that as that reference point. So where is the noble silence then coming from? So for me, recently I was thinking that I was thinking, what triggers me? What triggers me? It's not difficult to see what triggers you. I would even say that there are so many AI tools. If an AI tool will study you well, it won't take long to figure out what triggers you in certain ways, certain manners. And they will be able to predict what your next 24 hours is going to be like. Because if you look at yours and my life, things are pretty predictable. For example, if you're a housewife who really enjoys keeping your house prim and proper, clean and neat, you don't need AI to predict that if you see some mess as you walk into the house, what it's going to do to you, what mood it's going to pitch you into, and almost what words you are going to use. So I remember this with my dear mother, who was actually very, very careful in how the house was kept. So sometimes if me or my brother, we forget to take our shoes away, and we had just dumped it in the living room, which is, you can imagine for a mother who takes a lot of trouble to keep the house neat, what kind of reactions that must be triggering. And when our mother would get triggered by such a thing, it doesn't come as a surprise for me or my brother because we are like, okay, yeah, must be the shoes, right? So much so that sometimes you might find that children or the spouse might actually manipulate you as well. Now, whether it is knowingly or unknowingly, that's a different thing. But others can observe your trigger points. So it's interesting for you to observe your trigger points. So while I was observing my trigger points, what I came to realize was that most of the conversation that I engage in, even though I think that this is original and this is me thinking, as I started observing my trigger points, I realized that there's nothing original about this. In fact, I am predictable. For these triggers, I end up saying pretty much the same thing. Especially this kind of a Dhamma talk. There are certain triggers that will definitely get me talking in this manner. So what did I do? I have developed a liking in the recent past to be silent and to observe in every opportunity. So especially in the morning as I go to work, I usually get a ride from my husband, who has a person who is driving and has another person who accompanies him as well. So there are 3 people already in the vehicle, which I also join. So usually all of us engage in a conversation. But of recent past, I have noticed that I'd like to be silent and observe what is triggering me, what is making me want to talk. And that is very interesting. And one way to do this is to actually close your eyes so that others think you are asleep. Because otherwise, if your eyes are open, they will engage in the conversation. And if you are silent, they'll be like, what do you think? So as I sit silently, watching for the things that trigger me into wanting to get into a conversation, what surprised me was when I started seeing the triggers in others, particularly my husband. I started noticing a pattern. When he sees something like this on the road, he ends up saying this. When he hears something like this in a conversation, his next conversation is something like this. And sometimes when he's starting to talk, I think, okay, this kind of a thought would have entered his mind. And then I'm thinking, okay, so all of these external inputs, it's almost like a program, isn't it? The input comes in, and then there's a perception about it. And based on the perception, the feelings arise, and then you react. And observing this makes you wonder, or at least this is what I was thinking, why do I talk at all? What is the point in this? Because nothing seems to be original. It all seems to be a bunch of triggers based on my own past experiences and based on my own likings and dislikings, which I have put into my own program. And the more I talk and the more I react, I'm just feeding my own program. And then I remembered what the Buddha said. Ditte ditta mattan, sukhe sukha mattan. What you see is only sight. What you hear is only sound. There's really nothing for you to do here. And when I said I'd like to speak about noble silence, this is what I meant. The wanting to be silent when the flow is to speak. Because there is our mind is actually, the moment we think that I am my mind, that is where the deception occurs. Whenever you think I am your mind, then what you see, you start thinking about it and you want to talk. What you hear, you start thinking about it, you want to talk. When you're eating, you start thinking about the taste and you want to talk about it. And you find that it's a never-ending cycle. It's very tiring when you think about it, actually. But instead, if you start observing in silence, you start to see the trigger, you start to see the thought, you start to see the fatality of the entire thing. There's really no value in it. Unless there's something you really want to say. And what I realized was mostly, I'm just saying rubbish. It's coming from a trigger and I'm going with the flow. But it seems so important. It seemed like I am the master of it. I am the inventor of this. So this is what I wanted to share, friends. And when I said let's practice towards the end, why I wanted to do that was so that we share this and then to arouse the interest in you to observe this. So how do we observe this? Now, this is also very interesting because when Ajahn Chah, when I came across this saying from Ajahn Chah in a book that I was reading, there's nothing for you to do. There's no theory you need to learn. You need to just sit and observe. And I was very confused. What am I supposed to observe? So basically, when you sit and close your eyes, let us understand what's happening. Usually we are bombarded by sense impressions coming from 6 sense doors. Our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So when we sit down and close our eyes, the eye sense door is temporarily shut. And if we approximately take during that time, there's nothing really specific to smell, nothing of interest. You can approximately take as your nose or smell sense door is also approximately shut. And during this meditation that we are going to do 15 minutes or so, we are not eating or drinking anything. So you can approximately consider that your tongue sense door is also shut. So that leaves 3 sense doors open. Certainly your ear is fully functioning. And your body and thoughts. So what do we need to do? We need to observe. What do we hear? Whatever you hear to your ear, it is only sound. Now, usually, in a state of delusion, we forget that it's just sound. We put a lot of meaning against what we hear through the various perceptions that is stored in our supercomputer brain. There are many things we then associate with what we are hearing. We like it or we dislike it. We think it's right or it's wrong. And we want to grab it or we want to strike it away. It's all coming from that delusion of what I hear has meaning to it. So I kept the alarm so that it reminds me to meditate and not just talk. So what I hear is only sound. And today, when we practice, this is what I'd like you to do, friends. Whatever you hear, just let it be as a sound. And then onto your body, you will feel many things. You will feel your posture as you sit. And given that it's about 45 minutes since we started, this is the time some little discomforts will start coming in. So you will feel some discomfort. Let us observe it. Whatever you feel, observe it and see whether you can see the liking or the dislike towards whatever you feel on your body. If you notice there's a liking, you will see also gradually, as you start observing, you will see eventually the grasping, the wanting. So the best thing to explain this is when you're sitting still with your eyes closed, sometimes a little wind will come in and that will feel very nice. And when a little breeze comes and hits you and it feels nice, that's a beautiful place to observe. Oh, I like it. I want it to stay. I want it to continue. And there, friends, fantastic opportunity to see grasping firsthand. And then thoughts, thinking, thoughts will come. As we are meditating in the next 15 minutes, a thought will come. Is it over yet? Is Nadeesha keeping an eye on the time? Is 15 minutes this long? You can observe those also. So let us try this. And this is how, when I think of noble silence, this is how I see it, where you observing your sense impressions. And how do you know there's a sense impression? It's quite simple actually. Where your mind's attention is, that is where it is, because the only way to know a sense impression is only if your mind's attention goes to it. So observe where your mind's attention is. And this is a meditation where you are not going to force the mind to do anything. So some of the meditation is when you are strict with your mind. Observe the breath. This is a Vipassana meditation where you let go. You let the mind be free. And you observe where your mind's attention is. So if you notice that you can hear a sound, that is where the mind's attention is. If you notice that you can feel your body, that is where your attention is. If you notice that a thought has come, that is where your attention is. And this is how we observe. So let us observe. I'll keep the timer for 15 minutes and I will pause the recording so that our friends who would listen later, they are not inconvenienced by 15 minutes of nothing. So let me pause first. So that was a brief 15 minutes of meditation, or rather noble silence, where you choose to observe in silence. So I would like to, I'd like to end with something Venerable Ajahn said. He said, you're all familiar with the Noble Eightfold Path, with the Sammaditthi and so on. He said there is another eightfold path, and that is the fact that you have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 1 tongue, and 1 body, which brings so much of sense impressions into you, which the mind devours. And some of it, the mind grabs with greed, and some of it, the mind strikes away with aversion. And he said, what is required is the middle path. He said, just imagine that greed is on your left side, aversion is on your right side. And these sense impressions will keep bombarding your 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 1 tongue and 1 body. That's 8 in total. And what do you need to do? You need to observe and stay the middle path without clinging with greed or clinging with aversion. And that is the practice. And he said, this is a full-time job. And he said, this is what I do. And I'd like to end there actually, because what greater place to end than with the great masters saying, this is a full-time job. Observe and engage when required, when there's a need to engage, and not blindly like we are doing now, which is purely through delusion. So let me stop there, friends, and I'm happy to take any thoughts, comments, questions from here. Yes. Do you want to ask? Venerable Onande Ananda Thero, he was here till a few minutes ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Nadeesha, for that talk and extended program of meditation. So this forum is now open for discussion. You can make your own comments or raise any pertinent questions to get some clarification on this topic of global silence, please. Thank you.
Is there anything you would like to say or ask?
We'll entertain the questions first.
Okay. So live audience, is there anything from the live audience today? Yes, sir. Sorry, if you can just repeat that. What do you mean by? Dr. Manori or Professor Kolitha, would you like to answer that? Because I am not familiar with those terms. Professor Kolitha, I think with this mic, the Zoom audience cannot hear. Yeah, so I think, so somebody was asking what is the discussion about? Yes, okay, you can take it out. Okay, sorry. Okay, perfect. There we go. You want to just give a brief?
Okay, just to repeat that, the question raised by Abhijit was how do you come to terms with these things of
Ashwad, Nissar.
So that's what happens to any sense, with any sense impression you get. you either develop an attachment to it or a repudiation or no reaction. So that's what happens. So the question is how we're going to deal with it. The simple answer is know the reality of that experience. If you know the true nature of any of our sense experiences as impermanent, suffering, and non-self, anitya dukkha anatma, then you'll see there's nothing to get attached, nor to get angry about, and everything happens just there. That is why everything boils down to mindfulness. The person who is mindful will see the thoughts that enter one's mind, and then we'll be able to deal with them and there, finish it out. After that, there's no thought progression. Progression. Prapanch. I don't know whether that answers your question. Maybe can be. So now, one or the case of what is again, it's a proliferation of thoughts. As a result of tanha, thought process will follow one after another. So tanha again refers to both attachment and reputation, both. Not just the attachment for something which is desirous. Even something is not very pleasant, you get develop anger or a reputation to that. That is also tanha. So tanha incorporates both those aspects of that process. Am I right? So, can I ask any questions from the?
No.
Nothing?
Yeah.
Right, then can I ask you a question?
Yes,
related
please.
to this
Yes,
topic,
please.
because I don't know what really is silence and noble silence.
Right.
Is there a difference between these two, silence and noble silence? If so, what is the most essential primary difference between these two?
Thank you for that. So the way I have understood this, and there could be other interpretations, silence is simply not speaking, right? Whereas the noble silence is about an inner silence, and that is coming from seeing the sense impressions, seeing the triggers, not consciously not reacting. So when you think of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Sankhara is the reaction. So you get a sense impression. Let's say I hear something. Let's say Professor Manori and Professor Kolita speaking, and I hear something, it's a topic of my interest. Now that triggers an interest in me. The reaction is, I want to contribute, right? Now, this is the automatic process that we are referring to. And if I'm observing this, then I can see, yes, given that the topic is interesting, I have perceptions about it. Now there is a liking that I have generated. Now I want to share my point of view into that. When I see all of that, then you can really make a conscious judgment. Is there really a benefit of now going and speaking? Is it that I am trying to actually position myself in a greater light? Because all of these things are about building our own ego at the end. It's all about that at the end. Making yourself feel good, look good, and making others also see you in a better way. All of these things. So when we have an interest in going and joining a conversation, it's either subconsciously to show that we know something, we can contribute. Now there might be a compassionate angle to it, to wanting to clarify. Maybe underneath that, still there's a need to show that you know it better or something like that, right? So the whole thing about noble silence is not being a slave to this process. Because this process through delusion, we have taken this process so seriously, right? We believe that it's my original self. I am really creating this narration. And we refuse to see that we are actually puppets in a process based on our past experiences and responses. We are just in a cycle, unable to get away. So Venerable Ajahn Chah beautifully says this. Why don't you come here to the shade? because you're out there in the sun and it's hot. Come here to the shade where it is peaceful, still and quiet. Okay. So what he's saying is, in our mind, there are two aspects in our mind. There's a flowing mind and there's a still mind. We get carried away with this flowing mind, which is where this whole delusion is occurring. In that still mind, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. There's only existence from moment to moment. There's nothing really to do. But in that flowing mind where we have conceived a self, there's a lot of things to do. There's things to tell, things to speak, places to go, things to do. We are so busy. So yes, there is an interesting question by Samanthi. During the meditation, watching the hearing as just hearing, how can you stop the proliferation in between the hearing? How can you stop the proliferation in between the hearing? Seems the mind cannot be blank, so does one need to anchor the mind to an object, example, breath till the next sound arises? Stop the mind from getting bored. So if you start observing that there is a still consciousness and then there's this flowing nature of the mind, you will notice that it's the flow state that we engage with all the time. It's this flow state that makes us feel that we are living life by being so busy, by reacting, by having so many things to think about, to speak about, and to do. This stillness is where you start just observing all this flowing nature of the mind. And what do you do when you hear a sound? So let's say for us, I think, I believe you would have heard this sound, the fan, right? Today is not a noisy day, so you can hear the fan. Now, as I closed my eyes and as I started listening, I could hear this noise. Now, the first thought that came to my mind was, this is not pleasant. And with that thought comes the reaction of, I wish something more pleasant was there to hear. You see how craving and aversion starts coming, because what was the input? The input was a sound to my ear. And there's a perception in my mind that this is not pleasant. In my mind, there is somewhere I have decided that this is not a pleasant sound. And therefore, whenever there's something unpleasant, we have a need to replace it with something pleasant. And this is how we live our life. So, as these things arise, and they arise so fast, and then when you realize that, okay, this is all part of this process, you start observing that this is actually just a noise, just a sound. It's just a sound wave. There's nothing good, bad, right, or wrong. And then suddenly you realize that you can be at peace with this sound. Think of some jarring sound that you definitely know you can't be at peace with. Imagine your next door neighbor is doing some construction and he's drilling a wall, and that wall happens to be next to your wall. There was some grinding noise. Imagine it's something like that. Then how are you going to respond to that? You're going to hate it because you have decided, you have pre-decided that you don't like that kind of noises. And that is what is playing. That's the program that is running. And this is where the Buddha said, what is heard is just something you heard. It's just a sound. Because remember, to your eardrum, this is a very neutral sound wave for your eardrum. This whole decision of I don't like this is taking place in your mind, not near the eardrum. So when this sound wave comes and hits your eardrum and it reverberates, and then this whole electromagnetic charges go from your ear to auditory nerve, it takes it to your brain. It's all electromagnetic charges of a sound wave. It's all neutral. There is no personalizing, there's no judgment in it. When it goes to the brain pulls out files, which we call perception. It's based on your past experiences, past decisions you have made. So there is a file on this sound, right? And I have written it in red, saying this jarring, drilling sound is very bad. I do not like it. I wish it goes away. And then comes the reaction, Sankara. Sankara is the reaction. The reaction is, generally what do we do if we are in the home? We'll stand up and we'll be like, probably you tell your spouse, oh my God, what is this horrible sound? See the reaction? And then you'll be like, can we make it go away? Should I put some cotton wool? My daughter has noise cancelling headphones. I have never tried it. I might be inclined to try it to see whether it actually works. All is a reaction. What triggered all of this? Is it the sound? Actually, it's not the sound that triggered all of this. What triggered all of this is my perception that that sound is bad. Now, when I replace that perception that sound is bad with it's just a sound wave, there's nothing good, there's nothing bad, there's nothing right, there's nothing wrong about it. And when I really, really genuinely start believing it, what's going to happen? There's going to be no reaction, but there's nothing to react. So what Professor Korita was just telling the gentleman just now is replace it with reality. The reality is everything is subject to change. Things that change all the time causes only dissatisfaction. Since I am subject to change all the time, and since I do not exist in the manner that I thought I exist. So for example, 51 years, I think I have been existing for 51 years. When I see my baby photos, I think that's me. So I have filled the chasm of non-existence with 51 years I exist. I exist in a time frame. That is delusion. Whereas in reality, I'm made of particles that is rising and passing away at such rapid speed. I can't pinpoint a single particle and say, this is me. Because by the time I pinpoint a particle, it's gone. So which particle is me? And my consciousness that recognizes all of this is changing at an even more faster speed. That by the time I'm conscious of something, it's long gone. So we are actually experiencing life in a past tense. Nothing is right now, because by the time we recognize something and realize we are experiencing something, it's such a slow process that reality has changed. And if you really think about everything we enjoy, it's the enjoyment is in the mind. Though we think that we are enjoying something by eating, the real enjoyment is in the mind. That is why even the devas and all of them are also enjoying, even though they don't have a body, because the enjoyment is in the mind. So when you start thinking of it like this, you realize that everything is in the mind. And that is why the mind has to be observed very, very closely. That is why understanding this mind is a full-time business, actually. It should be a full-time preoccupation. Thank you. Yes, please. Yes. Would you like to say it here so that they can hear?
So I hope this is not my ego wanting to show something below. It's a kind of genuine clarification and seeking. Now we know meditation to be of two types.
Yes.
Samatha and vipassana. So samatha is where you want to focus and keep your mind paying attention to one thing. Then vipassana means seeing things. Seeing that they arise and cease, or that there is constant flux, and they are always unsatisfactory. And then finally later, when you have developed your insights, you can also know it's anartha. Now, so when I was following your instructions, so I could feel the breeze hitting me here, and very regular, periodic as the thing turns. And then I could also, what else did I say? And then I think through habit, my mind went to the breath, right? So fluctuating between these two. But then, yes, fine. I didn't get attached. I hope I didn't also feel any discomfort. So more or less in the middle. But I was wondering, where is the meditative part of it? So my mind is not focused on anything. Nor is it doing vipassana. So where does the meditation come? If you can express. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Okay, that's a fantastic question. Absolutely fantastic question. Thanks for that. So very shortly, samatha is required to tame the monkey mind. So the Buddha said our mind is a monkey mind, jumping from this and that and on. So this monkey needs to be tamed. And he always said, start with samatha meditation, because we come from the monkey world, right? Where we are flowing to this, that, and the other. So as you sit down, it actually helps to do some anapanasati and calm the mind down, right? And that way we are almost commanding the mind, forcing the mind to calm down. And when you're doing vipassana, anapanasati becomes the resting point. When there's nothing to do, the mind goes by habit to the breath, and that is fine, right? It's for most people, that's how it happens. So the question is, you're asking a fantastic question, because that is the same question I also had. Initially, when I was doing vipassana, I was like, what am I doing? Is this useful? Right? But as you, and this is where you need sometimes a little bit of faith, to trust the process and stick with it. So since Venerable Cha is always, Ajahn Cha is always saying, just do nothing, just observe. So as I observe, what I realized was how the nature of our mind, So one nature is wanting to be busy and useful, right? It is contrasting with do nothing. For example, if you sit still, not meditating, you're just sitting and doing nothing for 20 minutes. We are programmed by society, brainwashed to think that we wasted 20 minutes of our time. Whereas if you use that 20 minutes to fold some clothes in your cupboard, we have been programmed to think that we were utilizing our time in a very useful manner. But in the Dhamma path, it's the opposite actually. We are wasting our time doing things that's not going to help us understand the true nature of ourselves. So folding clothes is probably not going to help you that much. But if you sit and just do nothing for 20 minutes, you will understand so much about yourself. Sorry? So so one thing is, I have noticed that when I have nothing to do, I'm very uncomfortable. This is actually a global issue. I have people who tell me, I love coming to work because in the weekend I'm so restless. Because see, people have again been programmed to think, in the weekend, you should be doing something. Go to a hotel and relax. Go to a spa and relax. Or be busy doing your chores. Now, there are fortunate people amongst us, including you, where in a weekend you find you have nothing to do. And that is actually fortunate. Therapy. Now, we are not used to this. This is not encouraged in society. This is not spoken about. This is not considered a good thing. Then you don't know what to do with yourself. So when you have nothing to do, you meet your raw self. And that raw self is very unpleasant because there's a restlessness, there's a base feeling of emptiness, there's a feeling of, there's a bit of hopelessness in it. We are not used to it, and therefore it is very uncomfortable. I would suggest, friends, as a practice, please try this. 20 minutes, you just sit, keep your eyes open, and do nothing, and just embrace that. Just see where it's taking you. You will find out, because this whole vipassana is about finding out your true nature. So Ajahn Chah tells this beautifully. He calls this the still, clear pool in a forest. He says, if you can go into a forest where there's a small pond, and that pond's water is very still and very clear, and if you can just sit silently and watch the various animals that come to drink, you are so still, you are so silent, the animals don't know you are there. He said, you will start seeing animals that you have never seen in your life. And if you sit for 20 minutes, and that's a start, and do nothing, he said, you'll start seeing animals, beautiful, strange things you have never seen in your life. And you will start to slowly understand your true nature. And that is Vipassana. So embrace that discomfort and stay with it.